Imagine living your life after 50 and feeling energized and excited about your future. Welcome to the Women in the Middle podcast, the podcast for women who are ready to figure out what they want and create the life they deserve. Here's your host and master certified life coach, Susie Rosenstein.
Hey there, today we're talking about how to figure out the meaning of life by driving 15,000 miles across America and doing what your mom always told you not to do, talk to strangers. Let's go. Welcome back to the podcast Women in the Middle with over 1 million downloads and counting. I'm your host, Susie Rosenstein, your master certified coach and midlife mentor, and I am so glad to be here with you again. I can't wait to introduce you to my guest today. I saw him being interviewed on CNN, and I was so inspired with what he was up to that I reached out and asked him to come on the podcast. He's only 25 and was having a bit of a quarter-life crisis that challenged and motivated him to come up with a really big and meaningful idea. When I heard about his project and book, Advice from America, Life Advice and Photos of 1,000 Strangers from 48 States, I knew I wanted to have him on because it's highly relatable to women in the middle, and his message is something you're going to want to hear more about. And yes, you heard me right. He's only 25 and now another honorary woman in the middle. His story knocked my socks off. I know you're going to love it. Okay, but just quick, I want to make sure you know about the new opportunity I have for you with my new sister podcast called Women in the Middle Entrepreneurs. I'm currently looking for guests. So if you're a woman in the middle who's 50 plus, and also an entrepreneur or business owner who's actively dealing with navigating classic midlife-related obstacles and challenges while you're trying to run your business, this new podcast is especially for you. Learn more about how to be a guest by heading over to www.midlifeinterviews.com and apply. There's lots more information there so you can see if you're a good fit for this show. Okay, now let's dive into this episode. My guest today is Imran Nuri. He's an artist and storyteller who drove to all of the lower 48 United States to ask 1,000 strangers for life advice before photographing them on black and white film. What an idea, right? Imran says he created Advice from America out of a desire to figure out the meaning of life. And spoiler alert, it's his belief that the meaning of life isn't to be happy all the time or for things to be great all the time. The meaning of life is to experience it fully, the good, the bad, and the in-between. I can't wait for you to hear his unique story and message. It is so powerful. So please enjoy this episode. Hi, Imran. Thanks so much for joining us on the Women in the Middle podcast, another honorary woman in the middle.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
So fun because you're obviously male and you're nowhere near midlife.
Yeah, that's right. I'm 25. So I'm extra appreciative of being on here, being 25.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. It's so fun. You know, I rarely have men on the podcast, but you are in the group of special people who don't mind being an honorary woman in the middle.
Absolutely. Seriously, I love this.
Now, you have a really interesting story to tell, which is why I asked you on. I found you on CNN. I was just watching away, and there you were on freaking CNN telling your story about doing something crazy, which was so excited because you're basically focusing on helping people understand how to regret-proof their lives, which is something as a midlife coach we talk about all the time. So in your notes, I just lifted something that you said because basically it summarizes what you did. You went on a journey to figure out the meaning of life, and your conclusion after coming back is that the meaning of life is to experience it fully, the good, the bad, and the in-between. I mean, mic drop, please.
Yeah, thank you. It only took driving 15,000 miles and asking 1,000 strangers for life advice to figure that one out.
I love how intentional you were about getting that information. Okay, so let's start. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You said you're 25. Like, come on. You're 25 and you had this amazing idea. So tell us how all of it happened. Where did you get this idea? What were you doing? Who are you? Take it away.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. I'll give you my background of just the last couple of years so that you understand how my past, especially my college experience, got me to where I am right now.
Perfect.
Yeah, basically it started with, I went to the Ohio State University for undergrad, and my big reason for choosing Ohio State was an organization they had there called Buckeyethon. And Buckeyethon is this 24-hour dance marathon that raises money for children's cancer research. I saw this as it's one of the biggest dance marathon programs in the country. I saw it as this incredible opportunity for me to be in my early 20s. And even at that time, I was 18. So in my late, almost done with my teen years, I saw this huge opportunity to give back to the community in a way that you generally can't when you're that age. And so I went to Ohio State for that, got really involved in Buckeyethon. And by my third year at Ohio State, my junior year, I had earned my spot as the president of the organization, had the chance to essentially be the face of the organization for the hospital and university leadership and our major donors. And I learned all those skills that go into, more or less being, quote unquote, the CEO of a nonprofit, which was incredible, to be 21 and 22 learning that skill. It challenged me like no other, but I loved it because our impact ultimately was raising close to $2 million in a year for children's cancer research. All with thousands of students participating in this dance marathon program. Wow. And it gave me so much joy, even selfishly and personally, to be able to spend so much time outside of my classwork and outside of hanging out with friends to do good. After my junior year, I had this, kind of, I don't know if I should call it a quarter life crisis. I was like, I don't know what to do next. I had this goal of reaching that, being able to lead the organization by my senior year. I happened to be able to do it a year early. And I was like, okay, now I've built this amazing network and I've got these amazing skills and I know how nonprofits and philanthropy functions. And I had this idea of having people donate $1 for every week of the year. And every week it would go to a different nonprofit fighting poverty. And the thinking was that if we could get 1 million people to donate $1 a week, then we could donate $52 million a year, $1 at a time. And at the same time, I remember I had that idea. I thought about it every day. And I remember going to one of my honors classes seminars where we just had meaningful discussions. And I said to my class, as all of them were getting their Fortune 500 internships, I said to them, I don't know what I'm going to learn more from pursuing a Fortune 500 internship, a more traditional route, getting paid well over the summer, securing a full-time job and, having that security, or if I would learn more from pushing myself way out of my comfort zone. And I literally said at that time, what if I went around the country and talked to strangers and collected their stories? Because I can't talk to strangers. It's not something that was comfortable for me. And that is not something that is very traditional, but it would be so impactful. It would be so fascinating to do something like that. And
so you're just confused. And then you come with an idea to talk to strangers.
Yeah. To collect stories from people. At that time, it wasn't necessarily about life advice, or even the photography aspect wasn't a piece of it either. I just thought this is the least responsibility I'll ever have again. And so why not use this chance to do something that is unique, do something that nobody is ever going to pay me to do, why not take a risk while I can?
Now, what kind of a response did you get?
My classmates looked at me like I was crazy, because again, they were all taking the traditional route and they were very excited to take on that traditional route. Now that summer, the reason I mentioned the nonprofit stuff is because instead of going across the country that summer, I started my nonprofit that had people donate $1 a week, launched at the beginning of 2020. And as we all know, 3 months later, the pandemic hits, things go crazy. And then, I continued to run it. I moved back in with my dad after graduating in 2020, continued to run the nonprofit full time and, tried to grow it as much as I could until ultimately shutting it down at the end of 2021. And I think going through the process of graduating in the pandemic, realizing that my nonprofit that I'd built from nothing wasn't going to work out and having to shut that down, kind of going through the grief of that process, I kind of started asking myself, what would I do with my life if I knew I was going to have just 1 year left? If I knew I was going to die in a year, seriously, what would I do with my life? And the answer was so clear. It came right back to that idea my junior year of college of, I would go talk to strangers and figure out the meaning of life. If I had a year left, I would really want to figure that out.
I can't even, it's so interesting to me on every level. First of all, I can't even imagine what your parents were thinking at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, they were a little nervous.
You're so outgoing, and this was really an issue for you. Like clearly your strategy changed you.
Yeah. I mean, the way I think about it, the example I always give is that I would be at a grocery store waiting in line to check out, and I would see something interesting about somebody, or you know how some people just have this glow of energy around them. You just want to connect with them because you're like, you're this good human being, I can tell. And I would psych myself out. You know, in my head, I'm like, I need to say something to this person. And I just would freeze up and say nothing. And then I would regret it for the rest of my day. And I hated that. You know, I just wanted to get over that feeling so that I could connect with the people around me. So yeah, a pretty radical way to go around the country and talk to 1,000 strangers as a way of getting over my shyness.
I just love that it was your idea. And what really stands out is the clarity you had when you asked yourself that excellent question. And so many times we, especially the people I work with, these amazing women, midlife crisis. I try not to use the word crisis so much because really it's an opportunity to check in with yourself and really reevaluate, reimagine what's possible, check in with your identity and what you actually want. So important, but we don't ask ourselves the best questions. And even that question can feel so overwhelming. Then we get even more confused. But the way you asked it, you gave yourself a bit of urgency, and that little bit of urgency gave you incredible clarity. So it worked for you, and boom, there it was. So what was next? Because now you got kind of a weird idea that you're sorting through that you really want.
Yes, exactly. That what came next was just planning this journey. I was like, I'm going to go drive to all of the lower 48 US states. I'm going to live in my car to make it affordable, as affordable as it can be. And I'm going to go talk to strangers, and I'm going to ask them about what they wish they knew earlier. In other words, talking to their younger selves about something. And sometimes I would phrase it that way. I would go up to a stranger and say, if you could tell your younger self anything right now, and younger can be the last week, it can be 20 years ago, what would you say? And I'd give them that opportunity to have a discussion with their younger self. And it was so interesting. You know, I think we'll get into in a second too, that people didn't make eye contact with me when they did this, which is a good thing because they really were engaging with their younger self. But I wanted to go around the country, talk to strangers, ask them about life advice, and I wanted to photograph every single one of them on a 50-year-old film camera. And that's the artist in me. I've always been an oil painter and a photographer. And so I wanted to create an art series out of this so that I could share it with the world. I said, if I'm going to figure out the meaning of life, I better be able to give it to other people too, you know, in a way that's not just me telling them the meaning of life, right? That's when people ultimately will see my series, which I'm turning into a book. And I know you know that. We'll get to that eventually too. But when people see my series and read the advice for themselves and see the stranger, I hope that people will come to the same conclusion I do. And if they come to a different conclusion about life, that's great too. That's totally fine. Whatever comes out of it, I just know it's important that it's shareable. Oh
my gosh. I love this for so many reasons. I mean, I'm thinking back to my first decent camera. It was in I'm sure you weren't born. It was in university. So it must have been 1982, something like that. And no, I think it was 83 or 84. Now I remember. And it was a used camera, a Russian Zenit. And I have a friend,
yeah.
You know about a Zenit?
Oh yeah.
And that's what I had in university. And I remember going to wildlife sanctuaries, and I just love photography. But it's so fun that it's so funny. You want to use a film camera. But wait, I have to ask you one question before we go into the photography part.
Yeah.
Which is so great. But where did you even get the focus for the meaning of life? Like, you could have asked strangers anything. Where did that come from?
So I tested this on a really small scale in Chicago, where I was living right before my trip. I am from Ohio, though. I'd only lived in Chicago for a couple months. And I went up to strangers and I would ask them various questions. There was a time where I tested the idea of I would give people an app that you could select basically any color on the entire color spectrum. And I would tell them, like, if you could pick a color that you resonate with right now, that describes your mood, what would you pick? And I tried that with some people, and it was interesting. But at the end of the day, I don't think people are as experienced enough with color to really properly pick out of, 256 million colors. So I was like, that's not going to work. I'm just going to get the same colors over and over and over again. And then I tested various questions. And I know you're seeing this, Susie. My cat just walked into the frame.
This is my favorite thing. I love to see what the pets are up to, and cats are always going back and forth in front of the, the screen. That cat is beautiful. He's kind of big.
For your listeners, this is a 13-pound gray tuxedo cat. He's got a white tuxedo bow tie right there. So hopefully that's a good description.
And what's the name?
His name's Prince.
He's very handsome, and his fur is very silky.
Yeah, he is silky, definitely.
Oh my God.
But yeah, I asked people these test questions, and one of those was the 1-year question, like what would you do if you knew you had a year left? And what was interesting about that one is that most people said I would travel. And I understand that. I think that was obviously a big piece of mine as well, traveling to the whole country. But I didn't want to hear that 1,000 times. I didn't want to hear 1,000 people say, I'm going to go travel. It was nice to come to that conclusion quickly. I tested a few other things, and what ended up being the best, that I got the highest quality, deepest answers, was that question of, what do you know now that you wish you had known earlier? And that, I call it life advice, and the series is even called Advice from America. But I'm sure you'll relate to this, especially as a life coach. It's better to share experiences than to tell people advice, right? Yes, and that's why I wouldn't go up to them and say, give me advice. I wanted them to just share their experience. And if somebody reads that and resonates with it, that's great. And if they don't, it's not the person telling them what to do.
Oh, that's so good. No, you're totally onto something. All right, keep going.
Yeah. So yeah, I started in Columbus, Ohio, and I went about like clockwise around the country as if you see the map, it's not a perfect circle. It's very zigzagging around the country, but started in Columbus, Ohio, went up northeast, came down south along the coast, then went out west and zigzagged all those states out there. They're huge, and then looped all the way back around. I tried to talk to about 20 strangers in every state. And typically I would look for people who were alone. And so this was either in downtown areas or parks. And I did that because I found that I just got higher quality answers from people when we could be one-on-one. There's nobody judging them. They did, when I went up to groups, I would ask them the question, and immediately they would just turn to each other and look at each other and go, I don't know, what do you think? And that's not the point, then it's not about what do you think? It's about, what is it for you? What's the most genuine piece of advice? And so I heard all these themes. If you want, I can go into those themes if you want right now. But
I do, but hold one second. I have a couple more questions about the mechanics, and then we'll talk about the themes, because I definitely want the themes. So I want to know, what kind of car was it? What kind of budget did you have? How did you plan the route? And what did you put in the car to make it easier for you to actually live out of it? Like, what was your strategy? What's going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, I think when people hear, when people hear me say I lived in my car for 84 days sleeping at rest areas, they're probably imagining a van. But I think it's very important that people recognize I lived in a Toyota Camry, which is a sedan, like a family-sized sedan. There's no way to lay down in that thing. I just leaned the seat all the way back, and I would pull into well-lit rest areas that had reviews on Google that said they were safe, and I would sleep right there in the front seat, and then I would take off in the morning and go. And, I would shower at Planet Fitnesses around the country. I had a national membership, which was great because they're everywhere. But yeah, the budget for the trip was about $10,000, which all things considered pretty reasonable. About a lot of that was the cost of the photography aspect of it. It was, the film itself was almost $1,000 for enough film to photograph 1,000 people on the camera that I used.
Oh, this is where do you even buy film?
Yeah. So I bought it from there's an awesome company in my hometown, Columbus, Ohio, called Midwest Photo Exchange. They sell all the film that's still there. Kodak still makes film. You might be familiar with Ilford still makes film. These big film companies are still out there and doing pretty well actually right now. But I had to buy 100 rolls of, it's called 120 film, which is medium format film. And each roll was $8.39. So $839 for all the film. That's a pretty major expense. That's almost a tenth of the entire budget just for the film. And then on top of that, I had to develop it and all of that. So overall budget, $10,000. I definitely didn't have that money I had a few $1,000s in my bank account and I used that and I got a personal loan to do the rest. Probably not a good financial decision. But I was like, you know what? People take loans to go to school all the time. Yeah, I'm willing to take a loan to experience this thing that's going to stick with me for a lifetime, I know.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Now, and why were you so passionate to do it on film instead of digital?
I'm glad you asked that. That's a great question. I think there were multiple reasons. One of the biggest ones was that I wanted to stay in the moment. And when you take a photo digitally, you see it immediately and you're nitpicking little things about it. And I didn't want to do that as a photographer. I also didn't want my subjects to do that for themselves. It's like, I wanted them to accept that I photographed them as they were. If their hair was blowing in their face or in the wind, that's okay. That's so genuine, you know? Or if there was somebody weird in the background, that's okay. That's genuine. You know, whatever it was, I wanted it to be very authentic. And so they couldn't review it. I couldn't review it. And so
I love this. Oh my God, that you were so focused on being present and trying to encourage the people you were talking to, your subjects, to be present.
Yeah.
Where'd you come from? That is a brilliant insight.
Well, you know what? So here's the deal. Here's where me being 25 is probably extra relevant here. I am on the cusp between Gen Z and millennial. And because of that, I grew up with the internet. I grew up with a cell phone. You know, I think I got my first cell phone when I was 12. And it wasn't a smartphone, but still, you know, my friends had iPod touches and all these things. And growing up with the internet and social media and things that are all about instant gratification, honestly, it's like a burnout. You know, I feel like my whole life has just been instant gratification in the form of digital technology, that film is so refreshing as somebody who's Gen Z / millennial. It's just so, like, it's so different from everything else. It's a slow process. You don't get to see it immediately. It leads you to wonder. You know, I didn't see my photos until after the journey was over, by the way, you know, things like that.
Wow.
I had to wonder if they even turned out at all. But it forces you to accept it, right?
Yeah, but it's scary. Like back in the day, sometimes if I was traveling or whatever, I would drop them in these envelopes and mail them in, and then I would arrive home and they would be there. Is that what you did? What did you do?
I just kept my rolls in bags, and I had a bunch of bags, like Ziploc bags of my film, because I developed it myself when I got back. That was part of the thing. I wanted to have as much control over it as possible. And it was a lot less expensive to develop myself than to send it to a lab. But yeah, I just kept them in bags the whole time and just had to wonder, I wonder if these photos are going to turn out or not.
Were you worried about the heat of the car or any of that?
Yes, absolutely. So I kept them in a cooler, but there wasn't ice in the cooler, and it was in the trunk, which is, you know, it stayed as cool as it could have been. But I did a lot of research beforehand too to make sure that the film would be safe. The heat is a factor for sure. More so with color film than black and white. And I did shoot all my photos on black and white film.
This is so good. Keep talking. Let's hear about these categories.
The categories, yes. Oh, there were so many themes. You know, I think one of the big questions that I had for myself and that everybody was asking when I said I was going to go do this crazy thing is, they're like, I'm going to be so curious to see if there's a difference between various states and regions or genders or ethnicities, whatever it might be, any kind of category. And what I found was that I found the same themes all across the country. Every region had the same things over and over and over again. And to some degree, at a certain point, as I was hearing these same things, which I'll tell you in a second, but I started getting frustrated. I'm like, I'm hearing the same thing over and over and over again. Maybe I shouldn't do all 1,000. Maybe I should just stop at 500 and I'm good. But what I realized and started to appreciate was that it must be true. If I'm hearing it over and over and over again in all these regions of the country, there must be some truth to it. And so, you know, for example, one of those big ones was that people talked about appreciating every moment. And that especially hit hard when people who were sick or had become handicapped, when they said that, it carries so much more weight as someone who either is nearing an end and they know that because of cancer, for example, or because they were betting on having a long, healthy life, and then life took a turn in an unexpected way. And so many people, I think the first time that hit me hard was when I met a 23-year-old in West Virginia who said, I got diagnosed with cancer a couple years ago. And at that time, I didn't know what was going to happen. And so it made me realize that living a long life isn't a guarantee. He said he was going to be in remission that summer. So I was glad to hear that he was okay. But, he said it really made him think about how it's better to enjoy everything and appreciate everything for what it is. And that was early on my trip. So throughout the rest of the journey, as I was stuck in a traffic jam or I got in a car accident a few days later, these crazy bad things would happen. And I would just think to myself, no, it's okay. This is part of the process. Life isn't good all the time. And if you want it to be good all the time or you expect it to be good all the time, you're going to be disappointed, right? He changed my expectation. My expectations became that things will go wrong. And when they do, I'll just take them on. So that was a theme all around the country. Just enjoy every moment. Some of those other ones were, people really talked about becoming themselves. And I imagine this is probably extra relevant to your target audience, your listeners as well, because I heard this from people who were my age, and I heard this from people who were 50, and I heard this from people who were 80. And it was the same thing, again, all across the country. People talked about how they had held themselves back from being who they know they are for so long. And sometimes it was family expectations. Sometimes it was cultural expectations, societal. All these different expectations forced them into not being who they were. And then when they finally decide to say, screw it, I'm going to be who I know I am and want to be, they were like, life just got so much better. It got beautiful and you could see it. And I'm sure you'll see it in the photos of those people too. There's a glow. There's a glow around them of like enlightenment. They figured it out. And so I loved that I could meet people who had figured that out at my age and people who had figured that out when they were 50 and people who had figured that out when they were 80. All that matters is that they figured it out, that they can be exactly who they want to be, no matter what that looks like. And I thought that was beautiful to hear that around the whole country.
Oh, good. Absolutely. Oh, bring on another one.
So another one, this one's an interesting one for me because I grew up religious. I grew up in a religious Muslim household and I am no longer religious. I really detached myself from that the last couple of years, but I still feel this overarching like higher power. And I've been trying to figure that out. And this trip really helped me figure that out because I heard over and over and over again across the whole country, all these people talked about how important religion was to them. And for the most part, people talked about Christianity, which makes sense. It's the major religion in the U.S. But they talked about how relieving it was to be able to send a prayer out into the world and their stresses were away. And I remember in particular, one person I met in, I think, Vermont said, she goes, I grew up deeply Catholic and as I grew older, kind of distanced myself from that, but I still pray every night. She goes, I still pray every night to God or some higher power, and I let it go, and I call it my peace out prayers. I peace out at the end of every day with my prayers. And she talked about how it was so like alleviating to just send her troubles and worries out there into the universe and to put it into control of God or the universe or whatever it might be, whatever you believe in. I love that. That's my new religion. My new religion is just something is out there. It might be God. It might be something else, but there are definitely forces of the universe that help us when we ask for help, and can harm us, I guess, in some ways. If I don't know, it's nuanced, but, I heard that over and over and over again. And so I feel like that's an important piece to being happy. Is like just, it doesn't have to be about God or religion. I think it's more about gratitude and letting your problems go, right? Just putting them out there and saying, I trust that things are going to work out the way they should. I loved that theme.
Fascinating. This is my background is in psychology and applied social psychology. And in my master's thesis, I used qualitative methodology, which is basically what you're doing. You're letting these patterns emerge from the data and you didn't go in there knowing what was going to happen.
That's right. I had no idea.
You're just so open to these themes. Were there a few more you wanted to share?
Absolutely. I think one of my favorite ones I'm at the age now where all my friends are getting married or having children. I'm in like wedding season for probably the next 10 years at least. And so that gets me thinking. I'm single now, so that gets me thinking a lot about, what is the future of my relationship? I'd love to have a long-term life partner, but I don't want to force it. And so I met quite a few people. One of the ones who stood out to me, I believe I met her in Washington State, and she was sitting on a bench just taking in the fresh air under a tree. And I asked her again, what do you know now that you wish you'd known earlier? And she talked about how she had moved, numerous times, just kind of finding herself, exploring the world. And she never rushed herself into a relationship. And she said, I would tell my younger self that you're doing the right thing because you're going to find that person eventually. And she talked about how I think at 45, she was just randomly at a bar, I think in Denver or somewhere that she had just moved to. She's with a friend. Her friend goes up to some guy there and goes, hey, my other friend over there thinks you're cute, and that was the stranger I was talking to. And she didn't think much of it, gave the guy her number and didn't really think he was going to call because she left pretty promptly after that. It ended up being her husband. And she was like, I waited for so long and I never settled for less than what I wanted. And it took till 45, but I'm so glad that I waited because this guy is my soulmate, he's my person. And I love that. I love that, like she really believed that her timeline, despite being different from whatever society tells you it should be, her timeline was her timeline. And that's all that mattered. And I heard that in a lot of various different ways around the country too. People being like, just let things happen as they're supposed to. And don't worry if you're not on the same track as the people around you. I loved that theme so much. It gave me so much I don't know what the right word is. I kind of felt like it's okay. Things are going to happen in the time that they happen for me, even if it's different from my other friends who might be getting married right now or having children right now. If it doesn't happen for me for another 20 years, I'm okay with that if at that point it's the quality that I want out of it.
Oh my gosh. I have to say two things to this. First of all, if anybody's listening, Imran's single. And I'm just saying, he's adorable. Listen to this guy. He has so much insight. If you know anybody, I'm just saying. Okay.
That's so funny. I love that. Yeah. Thank you for playing matchmaker here.
I can't help myself. If my kids are listening, they're cringing right now because, of course, so you're not the only recipient of this kind of behavior. Okay. So the other thing, this comes up a lot in my coaching in my community. And I, talk about this as believing that you're on the right path. There's nothing wrong with your path, but a lot of times we think I'm doing something wrong. I need to do something completely different and get on a different path, a new path. There's nothing wrong with tweaks, but everything you've done is part of who you are. And that part of the path is absolutely going to contribute to where you're going in the future. And so that belief that it's okay, let it happen. You're on the right path. It doesn't mean you just sit back, but you can let go of the angst of thinking that things should be something other than what they are.
Exactly. Well said. I love that. That's a great way of phrasing it.
All right. You need to share at least one more.
All right. Let me think of another great theme here. There were so many
they're all so good. They're so good.
Yeah. So many of these are really deep and very introspective. There were quite a few other ones that people talked about taking care of your finances and investing and making sure. And that was really about setting yourself up for success for the future. And people talked about how it's never too late. The best time is to do something is 10 years ago. The next best time is right now. Right.
Oh, that's so good. Well, actually, I have
one of my favorite themes.
That is so good. It's if it hasn't happened yet, just make it happen now. Who cares?
Yes, exactly. I take that to heart too. I feel like I started doing that the last couple of years where, again, I grew up with social media. And so you can see these studies where Gen Z, when you ask them, what do they want out of a dream career? Being a YouTuber is up there in top 5. That wasn't even a phrase for millennials or the next generation, So I'm part of that. I'm unapologetically a student of YouTube Academy is what I like to say. And so I started realizing when I think just a couple of years ago, even before this trip, I was the best time to have started a YouTube channel would have been when I was 16. And the next best time is right now. And I'm so glad I started taking it seriously because just by going through the process, I started learning so much about what makes great content, what people enjoy watching, what I enjoy creating. And in the past 2 years, I've grown a following from zero to, I think I have over 350,000 followers across social media now, just because I started 2 years ago.
Wow.
And again, the best time would have been 10 years ago, but you can't change the past, right? So what you can change is what you do right now, right? And I'm a big believer in that. And so if you want to make a wild transformation, you can, but it doesn't have to be like you said, right? It can just be little changes using
Absolutely.
using past. Yeah.
Yeah, but I do have one specific question, and then I want to hear what's next, and we'll talk more about how people can get the book. But did anybody talk about pets? I can't imagine that they were not discussed. Can you share a little bit about what people had to say about the pets in their lives?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They talked about pets. There are so many photos of people with their dogs and even some photos of people with their cats, which I was like, oh, great. You're taking your cat for a walk. That's nice. But yeah, people totally talked about their animals. I think the one that stuck out to me the most, oh, I love this so much because it reminded me of my mom. My mom, by the way, in the last couple of years, got a divorce from my dad, and she's so happy now. Like, I love her to death. I'm so happy for her. But one of those things that my mom wanted to do was she always wanted my dad to take her to the Grand Canyon, and he just never did. So after she got the divorce, one of the first things she did was she went to the Grand Canyon, and she saw that. And so when I was at the Grand Canyon on my trip, as I was leaving, I'm walking out and I'm a little bit further away at a point somewhere in the park where you can't actually see the canyon. And I see this woman with her dog, and it's a small, I don't know exactly what kind, small white dog. And she's holding the dog in her arms. And I stopped her for a second. I gave her my spiel. I said, hey, I'm driving across the country, talking to strangers, asking them for life advice. If you got 2 minutes, I'd love to ask you my life question. And when I asked her, what would you tell your younger self, knowing what you know now? She said almost the same thing as my mom. She said, I got divorced 5 years ago. And in these past 5 years, I've been waiting to find somebody who will take me to the Grand Canyon. And at a certain point, I decided, you know what? I don't need someone to take me there. I'm just going to take my dog, and we're going to go together, and we're going to go see the Grand Canyon. And she's like, you caught me about 2 minutes before I'm about to go see the Grand Canyon for the first time. And, I'm talking to her, like, tearing up because I feel like I was talking to my mom, alternative version of my mom. I was like, I 100% understand what you're talking about, like in a very odd way. And I told her that. I was like, my mom did the exact same thing. She waited for so long for someone to take her to see this beautiful display of nature. And at a certain point just said, you know what? I'm in control of my own life. I can do this. And she did it. And I was like, oh, well, how beautiful to catch somebody right in that moment of like freedom, right?
Oh my gosh. And she took her dog. The dog it gave her enough confidence to not really be alone, it sounds like.
Exactly. And there are so many people who said the same thing with their dogs too. Just companions. It's pure companionship.
Yeah. Non-judgmental, loving companionship. Yeah. It's
exactly.
Good. Wow. I could talk to you all day. Now, I know that's not possible. But this is so much fun. Thank you so much for all these stories. Now, what I'd like to know is, what was it like for you to return, to have completed that part of the project, and to make the transition into the next part of the project?
Yes. Oh, it was surreal coming back. I mean, to give you an idea, the last 15 minutes of my drive, I was driving on a road that I drove to and from high school for 4 years. I had driven that road so many times, just hundreds, probably thousands of times. And this time it was different. I was like, I'm on the same path I've taken so many times before, but now I have 15,000 miles and 1,000 pieces of life advice behind me. And it's just, I saw the world in a completely different way. I noticed it right there. I've seen this a million times, and today it's different. And after that, I got back. In the next couple of months, I developed my film, I digitized it, started editing it, and then started sharing it on social media. I was like, okay, I went and did this crazy thing. If you want to learn what I learned from it, I'm going to share it. This is the free version. And so I planned this. I was like, there are going to be 3 ways that people can experience what I experienced. The free version is social media. Anybody can see it from anywhere in the world. The paid version is the book that I just launched on Kickstarter last week. which I'll plug in a second as well. And the third version will eventually be exhibiting the artwork, exhibiting the photos in galleries and museums, hopefully. That's a best case scenario. But I want people to be able to experience it in those various different ways. And so it's been people have been very receptive on social media of this series. It's been ultimately what I realized after the journey. Again, I didn't really know what the meaning of life was at the beginning. I didn't know what the message of this series was going to be. And at the end of it, I realized that this is a huge series that can bring people together, because you see people who look different from you, who live far away from you, and they share an experience that they've had that you've had too. And I think that just forces you to look at that and say, that could be anybody around me. That could be my next door neighbor. That could be somebody I walk past on the street. It could be somebody I see on a vacation. You never know when the person around you, despite maybe initially thinking that they have nothing in common with you, actually has a lot in common with you. And so my hope with this book and the series is that people see it and find a sense of unity in themselves in a time where, the world is extremely divisive and seems to be getting more that way day by day. So I hope that my book and this series will make a small dent in bringing people together.
Oh my gosh, I love that. So how can people get a hold of you and get a hold of the book? What's happening?
Yeah, so the book is called Advice from America, Life Advice and Photos of 1,000 Strangers from 48 States. And if you go to advicefromamerica.com, it takes you to the Kickstarter page. And if you're listening to this after July 13th, it'll take you to a different web page that still is about the book. It's 640 pages. It's 10 by 10 inches. It's hardcover, and it has all 1,000 photos of the strangers who I met, along with their life advice and all the other crazy things that happened along the way, like getting a matching tattoo with stranger 549, getting into a car accident on day 10, showering in Planet Fitnesses all over the place and having to live kind of grimy for 3 months. All these crazy stories are going to be in there as well. And so the book is available now. It's $55 plus shipping. And yeah, again, if your listeners want to get it, they can go to advicefromamerica.com, and I hope that they'll add it to their collection of coffee table books.
Oh my gosh. Well, women in the middle have coffee tables, and we love books.
We love that. I love that.
Oh my gosh. Imran, thank you so much for sharing this time with us today. You're awesome. This project, it just has me giddy with joy about your joy, your imagination, your creativity, your ability to go after what you're passionate about when you were broke, that you took a risk on yourself, that you had your own back, you trusted yourself to take out a loan and to do something that is kind of a crazy, fun, exciting idea. And now to turn it into something so important about basically how we can regret-proof our lives. I mean, and you're only 25. Come on. What is next in your future? Actually, what kind of a timeline is the end of this project? What do you see?
Yeah, the timeline. So the book will be ready for people in time for Christmas, which is that I've been planning that way in advance so that it's going to be a great gift and people can have it in time to enjoy for the holidays. I think 2024 is going to be a lot of sharing the message. Really, I want to go back around the country, not the same way as that. I don't want to live in my car again, to be honest. But I'd love to share the message as far and wide as possible, because my motivation for doing anything is about making the world a little bit better. And I really believe that this series and sharing what I learned from the series and the people around me will make the world better. So I hope that I can share that in big ways in 2024.
Oh my gosh. So great. I just can't thank you enough for hopping on. And I'm very proud of myself that I saw you on CNN and I went after you. I'm like, this guy is coming on my podcast.
Oh, Susie,
awesome.
I'm so glad you reached out. It's such, like I said, it's such an honor to be on your podcast. And I know you don't bring men onto the podcast very
Not
often.
So much.
So I really recognize how special that is to be here. So I appreciate that you and your listeners were kind enough to have me here.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. I wish you all the best and much, much success. I'll see if I know anybody who can help get your upcoming show into Toronto. I know some people. I'll see what I can do.
That would be amazing. Thanks so much, Susie.
Okay, that's it for this episode. What can I say? I told you that you were likely going to be super inspired and impressed with Imran's initiative, creativity, and overall sense of thinking about life advice and avoiding regrets at such a young age. I thought this was pretty unusual for somebody only 25. But on the other hand, like so many of us, he was stuck. and he didn't know what he wanted to do. One of my favorite messages from his work was to fully appreciate that it's not realistic to be happy all the time, and how precious living in the present moment and embracing the importance of not wasting valuable time waiting. How many of us just wait for something good to happen? Just do the stuff you want to do. The other thing I really heard from his story was how helpful a journey is. Doing something novel to get insight and perspective. And that alone will move you forward and out of stuckness. Even if you don't have total clarity just yet, just starting to do something new, taking a step, doing something different, it is so helpful. Actually, that's one of the reasons that the Women in the Middle Academy is so helpful. By connecting with so many other midlife women also working on growing forward, it's hard not to change perceptions and ultimately start to make changes yourself. You're just getting so many different inputs. You're hearing about so many different experiences and the way people are handling things. It's just so good. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. We had a super fun interview and I was totally fascinated by his story and the project overall. The time just flew by. Okay, as you know, this podcast is all about how to love your life again after 50. It's really all about coaching you to be more intentional and to incorporate mindfulness into your life as a regular practice. This is how you put yourself on your agenda. My focus as your midlife coach is to help you get unstuck, clear, and focused on your current values and priorities so you don't have regrets. You can absolutely create less busy and more balance. The bottom line is that you know you're meant for more, and I also know that you don't want to waste valuable time. So if you're ready to make some important changes with what I'm thinking of as a new midlife operating system, you can be way more clear about what you want and how to get there. And I can totally help you create the success you're looking for. That's why I created the Women in the Middle Academy with you in mind, because it's a warm, supportive, and fun coaching community of like-minded women who grow forward together so you feel great about your future. Email me your questions and let's talk about it and see if it's for you. Go ahead and book your free, no-obligation momentum call at www.womeninthemiddleacademy.com. For show notes and links, head over to www.susierosenstein.com and click the podcast tab and look for episode 311. And if you're interested in applying to be a guest on my new podcast, Women in the Middle Entrepreneurs, head over to www.midlifeinterviews.com and apply. Thanks so much for listening. It's time for you to put yourself first, one thought at a time. I'm Susie Rosenstein, and I'll talk to you again next week.